Valentina, I think we're still waiting for one of the voting members. We can start.
Oh, yeah, that's perfectly fine. You can convene whenever you're ready.
Okay, other Seth, I think we're, let me give it one more second. Hey, Seth.
Good morning.
Morning.
Nice to see everybody again.
Likewise. We're waiting for one of the other voting members, so if you bear with me, hopefully we'll start in a second. Valentina, just for logistics, I was going to, let me make sure I can share screen. Do I have screen sharing rights?
Yes, I already set it up. Yes.
Okay. And we can leave it like this for a couple of minutes while we do the introductions, and then I'll pull slides up after we do that. Does that work?
Yeah, I will leave it on for the whole meeting.
Okay. Sorry, I'm just trying to contact the one remaining person. All right. I'm just gonna, I think we probably, in the interest of time, ought to get started. We are missing one of the voting members of the board, but hopefully they will dial in momentarily, and then we can commence with the sort of full business for this. So I'll kick off the meeting here. We have, I think, in the past sort of formally used Robert's Rules of Order, but this is hopefully a more informal kind of reintroduction to the board and reinvigorating this process. And so if folks are okay with dispensing with some of that formality, then I'll hopefully accept doing that for this meeting. Thanks, I see some nods, so that's great. So we'll kind of go through the agenda in a second. We'll do welcome and introductions momentarily. There we go. My goals for this meeting are sort of twofold. One is to just reconvene this board and hopefully reinvigorate the process of having a data analysis technology advisory board for the state. And so I'm glad that we've got some members that we can pull together and have this meeting. It has been a while since the last meeting, and we can talk about that in a second. And then the second goal is to just sort of get everybody up to date and sort of have a level playing field for the information, particularly that the board members have. It has been a long time since the board has convened. For some of you, it is the first time participating in one of the board meetings. So I think for me, the other sort of secondary purpose for today's meeting is to just sort of have an update and get everybody level setted. And then we will have some activities that we have to complete by the end of the calendar year as a board. So queuing up the sort of timeline and scope of those activities. But now that I think we have, we saw the voting members of the board here. Let's kick off the meeting. We'll do some welcome and introductions. I'll introduce myself in a second, then if we can go through the different either members of the board or designees, that would be great. Again, it's been a while since this board met, and I'm glad to see some new faces, some familiar faces, and excited to begin sort of new work with this group. I'll just introduce myself, and we'll go through some of the scope of the board in a second. My name is Scott Gall. I'm the Chief Data Officer for State of Connecticut and the Chair of the Data Analysis and Technology Advisory Board. And we have 4 appointed voting members of the board here today. And I will, in alphabetical order, go through. And if you want to introduce yourself, and also because this is, I think, the first time for some of you in a long time since meetings, if you want to just introduce and give a little more about who you are as a person and what brought you to this, I think that helps us become familiar with ourselves and just to be able to kind of work together effectively. So Bree, you are the first of the appointed voting members. Do you want to say hi?
Sure. It's my first meeting. I work at the legislature. I was appointed by the House Republican leader. I do love data and especially maps and GIS stuff. And it's a varying part of my job. So that makes my job fun. And I know a few of you, but not too many. So I'm looking forward to getting to know everyone else and learning what our goals are.
Right. Thad, I think you are next.
Thad Dimkowski. I am the GIS analyst for the town of South Windsor and an appointed member to the board. I deal with data on a regular basis from the aspect of geographic information. I'm here to provide input, hopefully, and collaboration and help accomplish our goals as best we can for the state.
All right, Seth. You're muted.
That's because I don't want anyone to know anything about me. No. Good morning, everybody. My name is Seth Klaskin. I am an appointee of the Speaker of the House and actually the new Speaker of the House. I've been reappointed recently. I spent about 9 years as the Business Services Director at the Secretary of the State's office before joining a local Connecticut-based software company. And about 2 years ago, I founded my own outsourced sales company that performs outsourced sales for IT and software companies. So I have a background in data and data use that I hope to bring forward to the board. Thank you.
Thank you, Michelle, here. Last but not least.
Yeah. Hi, everyone. Good to be here. I'm Michelle Reardon, and I'm the Executive Director of the Connecticut Data Collaborative. I was appointed by the Senate Majority Leader obviously love data. Our mission is to democratize access to public data and build data literacy skills. So being a part of this board is right along the lines of all the work that we do at CT Data. So happy to be here. Thank you.
And then we have some of the ex officio members here. I don't think we have a full slate, but I know a few of you. I'll start with actually, Alfredo is not an ex officio member. He's an official member of the board through legislative change last year, although it hasn't made it into statutes yet. But Alfredo, if you want to introduce yourself, and then I think maybe just based on my screen, if I'm reading everyone correctly, Charlotte, Dave, and then I'm not sure if there's anyone else from the other designees from the other sort of ex officio authorities. But if you're here, please say so and who you are.
Yeah, hi, I'm Alfredo Herrera. I am the Geographic Information Officer for the state of Connecticut. In OPM, I work with Scott on all things GIS coordination and just kind of moving the needle on like a lot of the longstanding GIS kind of issues that have been going on in the state to kind of make sure that we do what we need to do in that space.
Hi, everyone. My name is Charlotte Muller, and I am an economist with the State Comptroller's Office. I am, I guess, Natalie's designee. I'm really happy to be here, and my goal is sort of to promote some of the transparency projects that OSC has been a part of, specifically the Open Connecticut portal. So I look forward to working with you all.
Hi, good morning. David Labadia. I am the Director of Digital Government and Operational Excellence here at the state of Connecticut. I'm here on behalf of the Department of Administrative Services, but to support the enterprise. I've been at the state for just about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I spent 25 years in private industry building and supporting data collection and analytics systems and platforms. So I have a huge passion for technology, although I wouldn't call myself a technologist anymore. But my teams are really empowered to help the state's solution and enable the technology's requirements in support of data and modern emerging needs of our citizens. So nice to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. Is there anyone else that's a member of the board that either I failed to recognize or introduce at this phase? I don't believe there is, but okay, great. Then let me do two sort of quick introductions as well. So we'll have you'll meet two other wonderful members of our team at OPM during the presentation section of it, Pauline Zaldonis and Katie Breslin, who will cover some of the updates later. I also want to thank Valentina Mehmeti from the Government Administration and Elections Committee that staffs the board, who has been a wonderful help in getting this meeting reconvened and trying to make sure that we fill some of the seats on the board. So let me, in a second, I'll pull up some of the slides. I wanted to do a refresher on the power and duties and the sort of scope of work for this board, and then we'll go through some updates on work that undertaken through the state in the past year and a half or so, and encourage questions or discussion on that just to get everyone the information that they need in order to make this board function effectively. The one topic just to sort of be covered clearly at the beginning is, as I said, it's been a while since this board has met. It's been about 1.5 years, a little more than that, actually, since we've convened. The main challenge has been filling some of the appointed seats on the board. For most of 2021, we had one appointed member for the board, for which I thank Michelle, who is the longest serving member of the board. We had 2 members at the end of 2021. OPM, through the OPM secretary, I think, has reached out a couple of times to try and fill some of the open seats. But for those of you who are appointed members, or if anyone else has suggestions, anything you can do to sort of advocate for filling some of the open seats on the board. I truly hope that this will be an active and group that provides advice and guidance to the state on some of our efforts. We do not have a strict quorum, as far as I can tell, for the board, so we can meet with 4 members. But I think the more participation we have, the more active engagement from the members, the better we'll function. So for those of you that have that are the appointed members, we appreciate your service for this. For those of you. But if you have suggestions on sort of outreach to the appointing authorities or other individuals that might want to serve, anything along those lines will help. And we can make appointments at any time, or the appointing authorities can make appointments at any time to the board. And it will help us in our endeavors. But the long hiatus has truly been for that reason. And again, the more seats we can fill, I think the better this board will function. So I look forward to, I'm glad that we have the group we have here today, and look forward to kind of having more in the future. I will pull up the welcome and introduction slide, the slides in one sec, and then we'll go through what we were supposed to be doing as a board once I find the thing on my list. Here we are. Tell me if I didn't do this right. Can you all see a slide?
You did it right. You're good.
That's
Looks
good.
good.
Thank you, Dave. So this is the role, powers, and duties for the data board. I wanted to cover this, and then if folks have questions or suggestions on this front, this is what we are supposed to be doing. This is section 2-79E from the general statutes. The only change to this really in the last couple of years, and we can talk about legislative changes in a minute, has been to add the GIO directly to the board. And so but otherwise the membership and the composition of the board is basically the same as it's been in the past.
There appears to be a window on your screen covering the slide.
What's the window?
Talks about give subtitles a try.
Yeah, it's a pop-up.
Oh yeah, there we are.
I think you need to switch the window that you're sharing, Scott, so that it doesn't show you the presenter view as opposed to the presentation itself.
This is good professionalism on my part. So end slideshow. Hold on. I'm going to turn off screen sharing. One moment. All right. Trying it again. PowerPoint slideshow. Share. Now, it's a good test of your qualifications as board members. If you can flag that I did it wrong, so you all passed. Congratulations. Does this look like what I'm supposed to be doing? You see the screen is full of one slide. I see nodding.
It looks
Okay.
good.
Great, wonderful. We'll just erase that from the tape. So these are the powers and duties for the board under 2-79E. The membership is also in that section, but the only change is to add the GIO. It's primarily an advisory board. The first two duties are to advise different parts of state government on different aspects of data policy and our implementation of it. So the first duty is on advising executive, legislative, and judicial branches on a wide range of topics that fit under data policy. The second is to advise OPM, where I and some of the other folks on this call sit, about the online repository under 4-67P, which is our state's open data portal. The board itself can undertake some actions that are covered under 3, 4, and 5, issue reports and recommendations, request either help, assistance, or information from different agency authorities or other parts of state government. And so that's something I think the members, you can sort of consider how you want to enact that. And then 6 and 7 here are making recommendations back to some parts of the legislative branch about data analysis skills. And then the bylaws that we talked about before. I think we had agreed in the past to use Robert's rules, but again, I don't think that's hopefully necessary for today's meeting. Any kind of questions or suggestions on this front? This is what we have in statute for the powers and duty of this board, but I wanted to make sure we're covering it and folks are clear before we jump too far in. All right. Next, this is just for reference. So my role is to chair the board. There's also a section of the statutes that covers what I'm supposed to be doing. And so I think it's within the scope of the board to advise on the fulfillment of these responsibilities, which is working with the executive branch agencies, use and management of data, facilitating sharing of data between executive branch agencies, and coordinating analytics and planning for the executive branch. And then later we will talk about the state data plan where there's some timelines for the rest of the year. And I wanted to highlight, there's a, you'll hear from some of us in the next hour or so. Highlight there's a great and wonderful team that we've, I think, been able to pull together in the last couple of years at OPM. And so that's a home and a base for some of the work that we'll be describing here. And I'm grateful for the fact that that's the case, and hopefully it allows us to kind of fulfill some of the responsibilities effectively. All right, there's a couple things I wanted to have as updates, and then it will kind of go into covering some of the topics that the board may have interest in. And again, if you've got something you want to pause on or discuss in more depth, please let me know. I don't know if I can see hand raising easily, so I think if you just want to speak out, we can handle it that way. There's 2 updates. One is a quick for the sort of board's information. This has already been fairly well publicized, but when I looked at the last meeting, this was on the agenda for the last meeting as an informational topic to sort of let the board know this is something that may happen in the future, and it now has happened. The census has changed the designation or how we're reporting some data from the use of the historical counties to county equivalents that are based on the planning regions for the state that went through a final Federal Register notice in June of this year. But in the long span of time, the last year and a half or so between board meetings, this is something that I think last time we had brought up as something that's, in the offing, is going to happen and now has actually happened. And then I did want to cover a couple things that were legislative changes in the past couple of years. Most of these are from the 2021 session, and we'll go in a little more depth to these in some of the subsequent presentations. These are not an exhaustive list. There are many other policy changes on this front in the past couple of years, but I wanted to highlight a couple that I think are relevant for this group in a sort of more general fashion. So in 2021, in what is I think normally known as the implementer bill, there were a couple of sections that made changes, particularly to the ability of state agencies to share data with one another and with sort of outside parties. So these are buried in a very long bill, but they're significant, and we can discuss the impact of that in a minute. But we took the statutory purpose for our state longitudinal system and expanded it to cover education, workforce, and supportive services, which I think really covers the whole gamut of education, workforce, health, and human services, and many of the different types of things that the state does. And it reconvenes some of the executive leadership for that function and pulls together some new data collections that I think are of interest, although the timelines for these vary a little bit. There was another major addition in the same bill, again, maybe a little bit buried, and Alfredo will talk about this in much more depth in a little while, but a long desired change for the state is we established a GIS office, brought on a geographic information officer, and a separate GIS advisory council, all in summer of 2021 through this legislation. Just to flag one little thing, so in that change, that's also where we had added the GIO to this board, and then conversely, my role is one of the members of the GIS Advisory Council. So we have two sort of advisory boards providing a slightly different sort of scope of what they're advising upon, but there's some overlap in membership to hopefully mean that we're not siloed in those activities. And then Public Act 21-35 is a wide-ranging bill that went through last year. One change that particularly relates to state's efforts on data is it required standard categories for race, ethnicity, and language for healthcare providers and health and human services agencies. The standards for this are administered through Office of Health Strategy, but I know that that's something that's been a long desire for many, is kind of increased consistency and in some cases granularity of reporting race, ethnicity, and language. And so that's a legislative change that facilitates some of that occurred last year. Any other, I don't know if there's things folks want to highlight or any questions on these. We will switch gears momentarily. All right, fantastic. So we had three general topics we wanted to cover for updates. And again, I think the goal of this is to get folks kind of on a level playing field with information, given the sort of long hiatus for this board. So we're going to talk about open data, efforts to facilitate interagency data sharing, and then our efforts on the GIS, geospatial information systems front. And we'll sort of have kind of an update on each of these. But if there's questions or comments or suggestions, please do not hesitate to speak up on any of these. I'm going to click the slides and transition the speakership over to Pauline Zaldonis, our Open Data Coordinator here at OPM. So Pauline.
Great, thanks, Scott.
You can just tell me when to click. So.
Okay, perfect, thank you for that. So hi everyone, like Scott mentioned, I'm Pauline Zaldonis. I'm an Associate Research Analyst at OPM. I'm part of the Data and Policy Analytics unit here. I'm also the Open Data Coordinator. So I'm here today just to provide an update about some of the work we've been doing related to the Open Data Portal over the last year or so. So let's see what's on the next slide. Great. So I wanted to give a little bit of background about the Open Data Portal in case you are not already familiar. So the Open Data Portal has been around since 2014, and it is the state's repository for open data published by state agencies. The portal is managed by the Data and Policy Analytics team at OPM. I'm getting an alert saying I'm too quiet. Can you guys hear me? Okay, I'm seeing nodding. Let me know if you can't hear me.
Seems fine.
Okay, thank you. Great. Okay, so yeah, so our team at DAPA, we work with folks at other state agencies to help them publish their data and make their agency data available as open data. And if you haven't already checked it out, you can visit the portal at data.ct.gov, and you can see on the right there a screenshot of our homepage, which we are proud of. We updated it in the last year, so we made some changes to highlight some of the data that we host, including some of our data stories, which I'll talk about more later. And it's sort of part of an effort to make the portal easier for users to navigate. So let's see on the next slide. Let's see. Okay, so I just wanted to sort of highlight the idea of open data and how it's defined in the Connecticut general statutes. I won't read all the text here, but if you're looking for the full definition, it's there on the slide. So open data, the sort of main ideas are bolded here. It's freely available in a convenient, modifiable format, so machine readable. It is provided in a manner that is automated, that allows for automated machine processing. It doesn't have restrictions governing its use. It should be published with the finest possible level of detail that is practicable and permitted by law. And it should be described in enough detail and have enough metadata that users can understand the data and how they should process it. So let's see on the next slide. I wanted to sort of give you a sense of what is on the Open Data Portal. It's very high level, but as far as the types of assets that are on the Open Data Portal, that top line there just highlights we have a little bit less than 600 open data sets, 58 maps, 144 charts, 37 data stories. So there's, we have data sets, which is kind of our bread and butter, but then we also have some data visualizations and maps, as well as these data stories, which I definitely want to highlight more later. And as far as, to what extent our users are accessing the data, we have had more than 11.4 million asset visits since the portal was created and 4.3 million downloads since 2014. And then, like I mentioned, our team at OPM works with folks across state agencies to publish data. So because of, this sort of wide network of users using the portal to publish data, we have about 100 data editors and publishers that were active from 2021 to 2022. So that's sort of a broad overview. And then let's see on the next slide. So that was, a snapshot in time, but I wanted to give you a sense also of some of the trends over about the last year. I hope this isn't too small, but you can see the charts here show the weekly API reads, weekly downloads, data set views, and data story views. So you can see, I don't know, it looks like there have been some ups and downs, but generally the traffic has been pretty consistent, in some places trending up. One thing I definitely want to highlight is that we get a good number of data story views. This is really driving a lot of the traffic on the site. Sort of compared to the number of data set views, we can see a lot of folks are accessing information on the portal via these data stories. I don't know, maybe I'll just pause here in case anyone has any questions.
Yeah, Pauline, I have a question.
Sure.
As we were putting together the original state data plan, there was concern as to whether state agencies would comply with mandates to provide as much open data as possible to determine and declare which data sets would be contributed to the public data portal, the open data portal, and that sort of thing. I'm just wondering if you can give us a sense of whether there has been compliance and active contribution from state agencies, or whether this has been like a foot dragging, pull them along type of process.
Yeah, that's a good question. And I don't have that information in terms of like, number of assets by agency as part of this presentation. I could definitely pull that together and get that to you later. I will say we do have, I think from my perspective as the open data coordinator, we have good participation from many state agencies. Some agencies have more data on the portal than others, but especially, we've had great success since 2020 working, for instance, with like the Department of Public Health. That's, began with a lot of the data on COVID-19. They've been doing a great job making data on the pandemic available on the portal. And then sort of because of that sort of, I don't know, open data success story, other folks at DPH have also been more interested now in making their data available on the portal. So we've had some good successes. But I don't know if that really answers your question completely. I think I would have to sort of look at, I could pull together like number of assets by agency and get that to you. But overall, I would say it's been it's been a good collaboration with agencies. And I don't know, Scott, if you have anything you'd want to add or if that seems right to you.
I think that seems right. And we'll have Seth later. There's another slide on sort of compliance with some of the statutory requirements. So this is a good one to come back to.
Great, thank you. And sorry, I didn't mean to, like hit on a topic that you weren't prepared to discuss today. It's something that I think we need to keep our eyes on if we want this endeavor to be fruitful. So thank you.
Just to add to that, I know several years ago, I think it was when Tyler was the chief data officer, he had to produce, I think it was part of the plan, or he just did a chart or a table that showed the agencies and how many data sets they had published. And so that maybe just updating that would be helpful for us.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Indeed, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. Okay, so let's see. We'll go forward to the next slide. Oh yeah, so another thing I wanted to highlight is the sort of data freshness of data sets on the open data portal. We've had, I'll talk about this a little bit more later, but a big push recently to make sure that data on the portal is updated and it's being maintained. So this is just sort of a snapshot of, when the assets were last updated. So you can see 67% of the data sets on the portal have been updated since 2020, which is an improvement over last year, although I don't have a chart to show the difference. And then you can see we still have about a quarter of data sets that haven't been updated since before 2018. So I'll talk a little bit more about our efforts to get that percentage down in a minute. So let's see. Oh, Thad, you have your hand raised. Go ahead.
Forthcoming, but I was curious, is there currently a plan for the maintenance of the data or the maintenance of the site? Who's going to be responsible, who's currently responsible for maintaining and keeping it updated?
I mean, as the open data coordinator, that's definitely a big part of my job, but ultimately the agency data publishers are the ones who maintain their data. So it's a bit of a collaboration. Does that answer your question?
Thank you. I appreciate that. Yes.
Cool. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. All right, so now I'll talk a little bit about some of our current areas of focus. The first thing I want to discuss is just that we've been working to develop some processes and standards to improve the governance of data on the portal. As I mentioned, we are also working to clean up some assets that are no longer being maintained. And then the third thing that we've been focusing on is highlighting our data through data stories. So I'll sort of take these each one at a time. Let's see on the next slide. I'll start just by highlighting some of the processes and standards that our team has been developing over the last year. So some of the sort of guidance documents that we've produced include a process for retiring data that is no longer being maintained, like I mentioned. So we wrote up a document that sort of outlines this process. It sort of details the importance of keeping data updated, maintained, retiring old assets that can be cluttering up the data catalog and making it more difficult to search for data, to browse data in the data catalog. We've also developed data publication guidelines that outline, what agencies should be publishing as open data, as well as the process for preparing that data and publishing it to the portal. Another guidance document that we've produced are guidelines on automation. So one way to sort of ensure that data is being maintained is to move away from manual data updates and towards automated updates. So we, there's a lot of different options for automating data publication and updates to the portal. So we outlined several of those in a guidance document for agency data publishers. And then we have two more sort of sets of guidelines and standards that are in progress. There's one on data visualization guidelines that sort of outlines general data visualization sort of recommendations, as well as sort of a style guide for data stories to make sure that the stories on the open data portal have a consistent look and feel. So let's see. Next, I will talk about the open data cleanup efforts that I have mentioned. So over the last year, our team has been working with agencies to clean up assets on the portal that are no longer being maintained. So we've been doing this so we did an audit of all the assets on the portal and attributed assets to each agency. And then we are working with agencies to either update old assets, consolidate assets. This refers to cases where an agency might publish sort of very similar data every single year, but in multiple data sets. So we are trying to sort of consolidate those into single data sets that contain data for multiple years, because we think this will facilitate easier analysis and also the ability for folks to find that data on the portal. And then thirdly, we're working to retire old assets that aren't being updated or consolidated. Sometimes an asset, it makes most sense just to be retired. And then finally, working to support agencies in automating updates to data sets on the portal where appropriate. So then on the next slide, I think I have some notes about our progress. So since last June, we've retired 254 assets. The majority of these had not been updated since before 2018. And we've been following the process laid out in the data retirement guidelines document that I referred to before. And we also have a data set on the open data portal that lists all the assets that are being retired, the reason they were retired, and in many cases, the reason they're retired is because they were replaced by a new data set, so then it will link to the new data set. So if you can access the slides later, you can click the link and see that data set. Let's see, so this process, I think, has contributed to improved data quality on the portal. It ensures the more data is up to date. It makes things easier to find because it removes clutter from the portal. And like I mentioned before, now 67% of the data sets on the portal have now been updated since 2020. So we're working to improve that number. But like I mentioned, it is an ongoing process. We're still working with agencies to retire, consolidate, update data. So we're continuing to work on that with data publishers at agencies. All right, let's see what's next. Oh,
So
yes.
Pauline, and just to add, I think Thad, to your question earlier, this is a big piece for the maintenance. In order for both OPM and the agencies to effectively maintain it, we wanted to make sure that it's the right data sets essentially, and that it's not, the open data portal is not a dumping ground, which is then very difficult for us to maintain, very difficult for the public to use, and the agencies are there's no value for them in that case. So we're trying to kind of right size what's being done through it.
Yeah, thank you. All right. So lastly, I just wanted to touch on our work around data stories. So data stories are basically pages on the open data portal that function like simple dashboards, so they can be used to present data visualizations alongside sort of text that provides context. They're really helpful, like I said, for providing this sort of important context around data, which increases greater access to the data and can help people understand what they're looking at. And like we saw before in terms of the stats on traffic to the site, we see the data stories get a lot of traffic on the site. So we know a lot of people are coming to the portal to access data through data stories. And this is actually a pretty recent development in terms of the portal. The first data stories that we published were in 2020, and they were the first ones were about data related to COVID-19, which we published in collaboration with the Department of Public Health. But then on the next slide, you'll see, actually on the next slide, it might be a picture of a data story. We'll see. Yes. So I'll touch on some other recent data stories in a minute, but this is just a screenshot of another data story so you can sort of see what it looks like. The main points I just want to highlight is that data stories provide, they have text that provides important context about the data. We always include access to the underlying data. Even if it's just like a link that links to all the data sets that were used to develop the visualizations in the dashboard. And then we embed different types of tables, charts, and other visualizations to highlight points just to highlight information in the data. So then on the next slide, you will see a few more examples of recent data stories. In addition to sort of the data on COVID, we have some other public health related data stories, including a data story on school immunization survey data, one about childhood lead poisoning surveillance. We have other topics, including education. There's one about the Roberta Willis Scholarship Program. And on other topics like government and sustainability, there's a reporting dashboard for the GreenerGov CT initiative. So on the next slide. This is my last slide, I think, so I just wanted to sort of give you a sense of some of the next steps for the Open Data Portal. Like I mentioned, we're continuing the efforts to clean up data on the portal. So this includes working with agencies to go through, like I mentioned, the process of retiring, consolidating, updating data sets. And then I would also like to implement a system to sort of track the freshness of the data, identify data sets that are in need of updating. A second sort of initiative, which I also already talked about, are continuing the process of developing sort of guidance, processes, and standards for the Open Data Portal. This would include finalizing the guidance documents that I mentioned before that are in progress. So that's about data visualization and data stories. And then a second part of this work will include improving the presentation of these sorts of guidance documents. Right now, they exist in a lot of different PDFs that are sort of made available just via links on our website, but we're exploring ways to present this information in a way that is easier to navigate and more accessible. Thirdly, I think another area of focus going forward will be the improving the metadata on the Open Data Portal, sort of doing an audit of the metadata for completeness, updating our metadata standard, as well as implementing a site-wide tagging strategy to improve the search functionality on the site. And lastly, we are also working with the Connecticut Data Collaborative to publish data both from the Census Bureau and also from state agencies. These are data sets that the Data Collaborative has made available through their website previously, but we're working with them to provide access to that data via the Open Data Portal. So with that, I think, Michelle, is it okay if I hand it over to you to talk more about that now? Okay, well, in that case, that is all from me, and I'm going to hand it over to Michelle. Thank you.
Sure, great, thanks, Pauline. So as Pauline mentioned, we've been working with OPM on making the data that we have on our site available on the Open Data Portal. So back when the collaborative started, it was before the Open Data Portal existed, and the focus, I mentioned as part of our mission is to democratize access to public data. So at the time, data existed on PDFs. It was often PDFs on state websites, and so or state agency websites. So we spent the beginning part of our evolution as an organization transforming the data from the PDFs, making it available on ctdata.org, and our backend warehouse for data is called CCAM, which is an open source version of Socrata, which is now called Tyler, which the open data, which data.ct.gov is based on. So, however, once the Open Data Portal was launched, we've evolved we've focused our efforts on accessibility of the data. So through our visualization tools, allowing a broad audience to access and use the data, as opposed to just focusing on availability of the data. So now we're the designated census state data center, and have realized, and much of the data that we host is based on user requests and needs from across the state. So, but it's all mostly state agency data in addition to census data. So we're working with OPM. We've decided that it makes sense, since most of our data is state agency data, for it to live on the opendata.ct.gov, and we'll continue our focus on accessibility of that data. So building data visualization tools that enable a broad audience to access and use the data. And this way also, it'll allow much of the census data that we provide, and even more because of the capabilities of the platform, to publish particular data sets from the Census Bureau that are used by many organizations of state. So we take, what we do is we take census data sets that are available on the census website, but we will pull out particular indicators, we'll combine different tables just to in order to find particular information. And by doing this, it makes it easier for the users, instead of having to dive deep into census data tables and try and extract the information. So I think it's a great step forward. And this way the public knows that the data from agencies, to download the raw data, you can go to data.ct.gov, in addition to getting the Census Bureau data as well. So that process is in process right now. So we're working closely with Pauline and the Tyler team. And so hopefully by the end of this year, the census data will be available. I'm not sure, Pauline, about the state agency data. That's an ongoing process, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes, definitely ongoing.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll try and sort of recap some of the questions too, but I think for the board members thinking about what you brought up as questions and what you want to think about for the future, I think we're hearing a little more focus, maybe a deeper dive kind of at the agency level for the transparency, what kind of data are being published through which platforms. And I think we have the information for that. We just don't have it in this presentation. So that's a good thing to bring back. And maybe, Seth, to your question, that would highlight and say like, okay, there's areas that we want to focus on, or the board wants to prioritize and say this is something that should be in the state data plan, or we want to hear from the agency about those questions. I think those are all things that are within scope for what the board could be focusing on. So we could do a little deeper dive on some of this at a subsequent meeting. Yeah, go ahead, Seth. Sorry.
Can I also just say, in follow up to that, Pauline gave a really good presentation, and I love the fact that you are already proactively taking measures to automate data upload. And I think, there's, with the technology available today, it probably would be easier for you going forward, for OPM, to just, as you bring agencies on board, maybe even require that you set up APIs to enable the capacity to just they can identify data sets that they feel are public under the law, and then just get them API'd in so that they're constantly refreshed and uploaded.
Yeah, this is definitely a priority. Increasing the automation helps everybody in the process. So that's a good area of focus. I just want to see, before we move to the next topic, which is covering interagency data sharing, I'll pull up the transition slide. Is there anything else on the open data front that folks wanted to cover? And again, you don't have to exhaust the thoughts now. We'll have more time at the end after the meeting if there's something you want to bring up. But anything else on the sort of open data front that the members want to highlight, something to prioritize or think about for the future?
Scott, I just want to first, I guess, acknowledge that your guys are, the team is going through and looking at the recency and currency of the data. I think all of us can kind of attest that, having accurate and timely data is really important. And so I just want to make sure that that effort is definitely followed through and continues to follow through so that you can continue to kind of clean the data and make sure that the data that's up there is current and relevant. Worst case scenario, someone goes to access data that they're not aware of is either out of date or is no longer valid. And I recognize not wanting to make it a dumping ground, obviously, but also to take that historical data and archive it so that it can be referenced for comparison purposes and study and that kind of thing. So I applaud you for your efforts, and please, by all means, continue to work on that.
Thank you. And I know Dave has his hand up as well, I think. And I also want to thank some folks from the Connecticut State Library who I know have a representation on the board here who are really helpful in thinking through some of the aspects of the archiving and retirement process so that we are able to go back and pull something if we needed to. So Dave, did you want to raise something?
Yeah, just I more for my awareness, I had two questions. The first was, could we look at maybe next time a view of who's consuming this data? Like, do we have a good view of that types of people? And when you kind of look at that user experience, user journey mapping, we thought, like who's coming in, what are they looking for? What are the most common data stories that are being driven out of the data would be super cool. The other one that I was just going to offer up is that we don't often talk about because it's difficult is, are there needs for paper data to be viewable to the public that we can't, data that's being collected today in paper format, maybe not in an accessible system even, to be populated into this open data portal, because we're starting to solve for that using robotic processing and OCR, which is, kind of scraping PDFs or paper documents for relevant content and getting that available to people. And I thought that'd be a nice topic for us to explore, just based on what I know about the state's data systems and not all of it always being readily available. I'd love to explore that topic or need with the group too.
Yeah, I think we have the same interest in understanding the user experience. What we can get from the portal itself is fairly limited, but and maybe we could talk offline about options there. But I think we would love to know a little more than we do about the users. For the question on the digitization, let me kick some of this to the last section of the presentation, because one of the things that we do is we have inventoried all of the data collected by agencies, regardless of the format. And so we should have a list of all the data that agencies collect from residents, businesses, et cetera, in the state. And then that's where there's a couple of other steps to try and figure out what we can get out to the public. But it would help, we could identify where there's data that's collected that is in a system that is inaccessible, whether that's paper or something that's just tougher to work with, and help use the tools that we have to prioritize. Oh, this is something that should be digitized because there's real public value in it, or there's some interest in that particular data set. So it's a good area to focus on.
Awesome, thank you. I appreciate the presentation, Pauline.
Anything else on this front? I'm also cognizant that I have planned poorly on time, so we're a little tighter than earlier anticipated. Anything else for the open data front? We'll transition to a new topic, interagency data sharing, and a new person, Katie Breslin, Outreach and Engagement Coordinator here at OPM. Katie, if you are ready, I will begin clicking.
I am ready.
Delightful.
Good morning. I'm Katie Breslin. I'm the Outreach and Engagement Coordinator. So I work with Pauline and Scott in the Data and Policy Analytics unit. So I'm here to talk about P20WIN. So P20WIN is the preschool through 20 workforce information network. And as we know it is P20WIN. It's our state longitudinal data system. And it was codified in statute in 2014 to inform policy and practice with a focus on ensuring that residents can effectively navigate state services and education as they move into the workforce. We have a federated data system, so no data is housed in a central location. Each participating agency maintains control over the data that they collect. And one of our primary goals for P20Win is to expand awareness of this system and then increase data usage in policymaking. If you want to go to the next slide. So P20Win has 10 participating agencies, originally focused on just education and workforce. We expanded the system in 2019 to include health and human service agencies, plus the Coalition to End Homelessness and the Office of Higher Education. And you can see that we have a nice cross-section of executive state agencies, higher ed institutions, and nonprofits. And to be a participating agency with P20Win is that an agency or an organization needs to illustrate that they have access to and authority over the data that they collect. So that does not obligate anybody to share any data. Data is only shared upon approval of a data request. And we are actively engaged in conversations with other state agencies to expand membership. Next slide. So P20Win is administered by the Office of Policy and Management to ensure effective management and operations and the facilitation of data sharing. And then the Department of Labor serves as our integration hub, and they conduct all of the matching for each approved data request. Next slide. So we established a strong governance structure with an executive board, data governing board, and data stewards. This allows us to create policies and procedures that can enable cross-agency data sharing, that can answer policy questions and address state needs. From a high level, these groups are responsible for responding to data requests, determining who has access to data, creating and maintaining data dictionaries, adding new agencies, and expanding access to resources to keep P20Win operational. Our executive board is comprised of executive leadership from each participating agency, as well as designees from OPM and the Office of Workforce Strategy. Not official participating agencies, because neither currently collect or have our authority over data. With the expansion in 2019, we also assigned substantial responsibility to the executive board, and we elected our first board chairperson in 2020, who just finished her first term, and we have just elected our second board chairperson. So priority responsibilities are to promote and advance the vision of P20Win, champion it at the legislature, and inform the learning agenda, which I will talk about in a minute. The data governing board is comprised of policy experts and senior management from each agency. They have more of a focus on the function and regular operations of P20Win. And because they're most familiar with their agency priorities and the data that they house, they're best informed to determine if a data request meets the learning agenda, the needs of the agency, and if it's in compliance with rules that govern how data can be shared. And then in addition to reviewing data requests, the governing board assists in the creation and documentation of policy and processes like data matching, metadata maintenance, data privacy, and more. And we are also in the process of establishing a resident advisory board, which will provide additional accountability and transparency by reviewing data requests that seek to use data from marginalized communities. And members of this board will be current and former recipients of state benefits and services. And because P20Win is publicly facing and it needs to be accessible to people within and outside of state government, all of our meetings are public. The meetings are recorded, everything is posted to our P20Win website. If you want to go to the next slide. So the learning agenda highlights the key topics of interest. It was crafted in a way that elevates the priorities of the participating agencies and wider state issues. And to develop this agenda, we established planning groups in late 2020 through early 2021 to brainstorm issues and develop memos, which highlighted priority questions to inform future data requests. And then if you want to go to the next slide, The learning agenda was approved by the executive board last year. The 5 key topics are student readiness, college and career success, financial aid, workforce training, and overcoming barriers. And within each category are questions that have been supplied to us by executive leadership from our agencies. And most, if not all of our active data requests currently fall into one of these 5 categories. And so this learning agenda is important. It provides a roadmap for us and potential data requesters. It allows us to really focus on these areas and making sure that our data requests and the research studies that are being approved are relevant. Next slide. So to do all of this, we have developed an enterprise system to facilitate the data sharing process. We created an enterprise. It is composed. It includes an enterprise memorandum of understanding and data sharing agreements. The EMOU essentially outlines the rules of the sandbox without requiring anyone to play in the sandbox. It's signed by executive leadership from all participating agencies, but it does not obligate anybody to share data until there is an approved data request. It establishes the formalized governance structure I talked about earlier. It outlines the request management process, and it sets security and privacy standards. The data sharing agreement is a document specific to an approved data request, and it involves only those agencies whose data are being requested, the integration hub, and then the data recipients. And then the DSA includes those rules and regulations that govern how data can be shared, what data are being shared and for what purpose, access requirements, confidentiality disclaimers, and then data destruction and self-suppression policies and time limits. So each of our agencies actually participated in the creation of both the EMOU and their respective data sharing agreements. We have a boilerplate plus subject matter specific agreements. And so this has really given us a strong structure. And then if you want to go to the next slide. So then this is just a big picture look at the data sharing process. It's more of a general approach and similar to the P21 data request process, but each box in the gray on both this slide and the next shows a step in the process to create and submit a data request. The first column in blue shows the responsibilities of the data requester. They need to determine what questions they want answered, what data they believe will help answer those questions, create a research design, and then submit a proposal and a request that outlines this process. The second column includes both the requester and the agencies involved, because it shows you where you'll find that data, what that data request form requires, the data sharing agreements, and then in green in that third column are the responsibilities of the agencies involved. And then you can see on this slide, it's about locating the data, building a data request, and then on the next slide, it is focusing on the development of the data sharing agreement, securing the data, and then sending and receiving the data. And I think that very quickly goes through P21. Happy to answer any questions.
I'm gonna add one thing to this that I think is kind of implicit, but just to be explicit with the board members for this, and because I believe it was a topic of discussion in the sort of prior set of board meetings with, again, largely different set of individuals. But underlying this is a lot of work on the legal agreements to write those in a way that could be used in a consistent fashion. We submit a report to this board every year on sort of updates for interagency data sharing done in consultation with the Attorney General's office. And we've had wonderful support from them in drafting agreements that can be used as sort of boilerplate templates for this purpose. So we're trying to introduce efficiency into this process. with those types of agreements, and have had just real wonderful help from the agencies, from their counsel, from the AG's office in developing those over the past couple of years. So it's a little bit buried underneath this, but I know that's been a topic of discussion in the past, and I just want to sort of highlight it here. And I believe Dave and Seth in that order had hands up.
Hey, Katie, nice to see you again. Thanks for the presentation. One of the things I'm challenged with is consent management for data sharing for consumer data. The legislation that was passed back in June, requiring us to get permission from citizens or consumers to do some of this stuff. Does that apply to your data set, or have you been tasked with kind of that challenge?
Have anything coming up?
So
Any
we
comments
have-
far off.
No.
Your birthday's far off.
Can someone mute themselves?
I think Seth maybe is unmuted. There.
So consent management has definitely been a pretty big topic of conversation over the last year. We have not had data requests that would include data specifically from consumers, but I anticipate that it will be a part of our process, and it's included in the data sharing agreements. So if that is a requirement, that would be a part of it.
Thank you.
I apologize. I was off mute for a moment in anticipation of asking. First of all, I wanted to say that, yes, it's great to see the EMOU and the data sharing agreements kind of reduced to standardized documents. And I would encourage that to be kind of spread out and used as a model going forward for other interagency data sharing, in addition to the P20 consortium. And then my real question was, excuse me if I didn't see it, if I just missed it, but is the Department of Housing part of the P20 consortium? And if not, does it not make sense to include that for homelessness and housing challenges for growing kids?
Right. So the Department of Housing is not currently a participating agency. The Coalition to End Homelessness manages and collects all of the data for the homelessness management information system. So that's why they are currently a participating agency. We have been in conversations with Department of Housing and hope that they will join P20 at some point. But we're in active conversations with a lot of different agencies, and hopefully we'll be able to, the more agencies we can bring on, the more we can standardize these documents for data sharing purposes.
Thank you, Katie.
Of course.
Just reinforce for the sort of advisory role for the board, if there's something where you think like, why isn't this part of it, or why, please add an agency like this. It's very helpful for us to hear to, target the outreach. Anything else on this topic before we transition to our next to last on geospatial information systems, and then I'll wrap up with a little bit on the timelines and scope for the state data plan updates that the board has some role in before the end of the calendar year. But unless there's anything else on the previous one, then I think we have Alfredo Herrera, our new, relatively new, I guess I should say, Geographic Information Officer, is going to talk about some of the work on GIS for the state, which again, I know a couple members of the board and many other people have had a long and concerted interest in.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'll just dig right in, try and get through this pretty quickly. So in 2021, the legislature created the Office of GIS and my position as the GIO, along with a GIS advisory council. Some of the highlights of kind of what we're responsible for is kind of coordinating on the collection, compilation, and dissemination of geographic information data across the state from the various agencies, other levels of government, such as municipalities and the regional governments, and vis-a-vis the COGS, as well as, through the various partners throughout the GIS professional community. Additionally, we're also responsible for creating a GIS clearinghouse, And then acquiring statewide orthoimagery and LiDAR on a regular basis, and then just kind of generally raising creating standards and guidelines and procedures for how GIS is done throughout the state of Connecticut. If you go on to the next slide. So a little bit about myself. I started in January of 2022. I have 9+ years of professional experience as a GIS person in the in consulting and municipal levels, as well as a little bit in kind of the aviation planning side. Most recently, I was the GIS analyst, coordinator, and admin for the city of New Haven in Connecticut. And within their office, we currently have one person, soon to have a second and possibly a third additional staff. So the first one is the broadband mapping coordinator. That's David Lukens. He's doing a fantastic job of trying to assess and figure out how to best to display where internet is available and isn't, and where people have adopted the use of it and have not. Beyond that, like I said, we are in the process of hiring a GIS analyst. Hope to complete that soon. And after that, we have maybe 1 or 2 potential additional hires beyond that to kind of really shore up the capacity to actually do good work in the GIS office. Go to the next slide. So some of the important milestones is GIS Advisory Council has been pretty much fully appointed and has met twice thus far. I think we have the next meeting coming up in a few weeks later this month. We've created a number of work groups from the Advisory Council, and 3 out of 4 of them have already met and begun work. The 4th one I will talk about a little bit later, but there's very specific reasons why that one has not yet met formally. We've also launched a broadband mapping hub to kind of explain our efforts and what we are doing with broadband mapping in support of the other 2 agencies responsible for broadband implementation throughout the state. And then we've also recently completed an MOU with the DOT to kind of expedite the completion and upgrade of the administrative boundaries, in particular the municipal boundaries, for kind of cartographic representation. So just not necessarily saying this is the authoritative place where the line is, but just kind of creating a more cohesive and kind of more accurate to reality version of the municipal boundaries, so that we can use them on all of our maps, and then kind of flow them upwards towards the federal level and flow them downwards to the regional and municipal level, so that we're all kind of working off of the same page, so to speak. Next slide. So I'll just dig into some of the priority topics and kind of go through some of those things kind of one by one. If we can go to the next one. So the first one is obviously broadband mapping. So like I said before, we launched the broadband mapping hub. So it's just broadbandmaps.ct.gov. And there is a wealth of information there. Currently, it is all based, all of the mapping that is there is based off of publicly available data sources, mostly from the FCC. But we will soon hopefully, we will soon have data that we have processed ourselves from our collection of availability and adoption data from the ISPs themselves. We are very much in the midst of processing all of that, and we'll soon have that ready. We received the ISP data in April and May and have gone through great lengths to kind of clean that up and kind of make sense of it. And like I said before, we're kind of making sure that that correlates to where we know things are in the state, and making sure that things are where they are. Next, please. So still left to do. We still have a lot of cleaning and alignment to do of our kind of what we call our denominator. So this is our location fabric. So we're using the E911 data. We're also using data from other utility companies to kind of verify what we know is where, like, so all of the broadband serviceable locations, so that we can compare against what the ISPs have told us that they can or cannot do. Beyond that, we're trying to determine where served and unserved and underserved addresses are, and kind of assess the access and adoption variance, so kind of see who could have access but they don't, are not taking it up. So we're kind of going through that. We're also looking into the affordability and helping out some of the other agencies that are kind of either administering grants or kind of advocating for consumers to kind of determine, okay, well, what's going on in this area? And we kind of explain that, help kind of provide the supporting data to explain those things. We are doing some third-party validation and verification of this information through surveys and kind of user submittals, kind of anecdotal. So we have like a way to we have a way. We've done a survey to kind of determine, you know, who has what where, and then we also have like a way on the broadband mapping hub to kind of for people to say, hey, I actually don't have internet, I can't get it, I've been told no. And then that way we have a short questionnaire that people can fill out, and then that way we can pass that forward to the relevant agency or party to kind of see what we want to do with that. Next, please. So next topic is aerial imagery acquisition. This is something that the GIS community is very fired up about, with good reason, because there's a lot of kind of benefits and data products that kind of come out of this acquisition. So currently we are looking to, we have a work group that's meeting monthly to kind of, actually we just recently changed it to bi-weekly. So we're meeting very frequently to kind of come up with the standards of what we want from out of the aerial imagery and the LiDAR, so that we make sure that we get the right product. We're in the middle. So Eric Lindquist from the Intergovernmental Planning and Policy and Planning Division in OPM has been assigned as the selected as the project lead on this to kind of shepherd the project and kind of making sure it all kind of goes smoothly and goes to completion. So he is in the midst of writing the RFP and making sure that all of our requirements for the flights are kind of included in there and worded in such a way that we get the right kinds of respondents. Beyond that, so with the capture itself, we are going to be going out for 2 flights in 2023 and 2026. So they're going to be in the spring without leaves, so that we can see the most of the ground possible. And then the same with the LiDAR. You know, there will be concurrent flights. So the 2023 flights will also have a LiDAR flight that goes with it to capture all of the elevation data. From that was going to allow us to pull out things like building footprints, contours, hydrography, and even create a 3D base map of the state by creating a terrain and 3D extruded buildings. That is a data product that is incredibly useful for planning agencies, planning departments, and independent consultants when doing land development. So that is essentially the aerial imagery acquisition in a nutshell. Next. The next is the GIS clearinghouse, as I'm calling it. I don't quite have a snappy name for it yet, but we will eventually. This work group is also meeting bi-weekly to, so right now what we've been doing is we've been assessing every state's open data and GIS clearinghouse, and looking at what works, what doesn't, and kind of doing our homework to learn lessons. We're also kind of talking with a very wide cross-section that's in this working group to assess what the community needs are, so that we make sure that we balance the needs of the private professional consulting community, municipalities, regional government, the state government agencies, and the academic community, to make sure that we are getting, that we are providing everything that they need from a geospatial context for all of this data. We are working through all of the technology, procedures, changes, and challenges. So like automation and kind of a lot of the similar kinds of things that Pauline talked about earlier in her presentation. A lot of those kind of standards and tenets will also apply to the geospatial clearinghouse. It is meant to be kind of set up in parallel as a complement to the open data portal. to really provide a better tool set for the geospatial data set. And we want to kind of create a no wrong door situation. So if you end up looking for a like a non-spatial data set that does live on the open data portal, we want to be able to kind of have a link on the GIS clearinghouse to say, hey, this data does exist, it's over here, and point them in that direction. And then vice versa, if someone arrives at the open data portal or one of the clearinghouses for either Yukon, DEEP, or DOT, we want to be able to get to any of the other places from any of them. And we've kind of started setting up the technology on the GIS side to kind of allow for that so far. Next. This is probably one of the most challenging topics that we've been tackling, is the addressing and geocoding. Mostly because the statewide address data set that we have is the E911, and through many reasons and complicated stories, the data set's incomplete, is kind of the short kind of statement there. So we are kind of assessing ways to complete the data set and really improve it in kind of one fell swoop. But at the same time, we're also looking at what procedures and policies and standards that we can set in place to kind of ensure that we don't kind of arrive at this place where we have an out-of-date data set again. So from that standpoint, we are definitely collaborating with the ESPP and DOT to establish, kind of workflows to see how we can get the municipalities to report the changes that they have to report, that they get on addresses to us in a more timely manner or at all. And then from there, we will set up validation and correction processes to kind of make sure that that data can get integrated into the statewide address data set, and then which will allow us to kind of share that back out to everyone else, and then also make a geocoder that is free for public use on our platform. Michelle, you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a question about this piece in collaborating with the COGS, because don't they have some of the data that you need?
They have address data, but they do not have individual address point data. And that is slightly different, because what happens is when you try to derive address point data from the parcels, the properties with multiple units, whether they are residential or commercial, become immediately a very big problem in determining what is where. So usually what ends up happening if you create it from parcels on multi-unit properties, is all of your points end up in the middle of that parcel stacked, as opposed to where they could be in space. And in some places, it's not a big deal, like a big apartment high rise. Okay, that's not a big deal. However, in a condominium neighborhood where it's individual houses spread out over, like, say, 5 to 10 acres, that can be a problem, because there could be an internal network of roadways that stacked points won't account for, which in the context of spatial analysis, when you're looking at census blocks and things like that, might not be a big deal. But when you're looking at public safety from, like a police or fire perspective, those are seconds lost that, could mean life or death. So those are the kinds of challenges that we're trying to balance with this, and that's why it's such a difficult problem to solve. We do have some additional ideas to kind of try and do some field verification and kind of in some other bench verification of the locational accuracy, as well as identifying external data sources that can kind of help us improve the data set in kind of like a one big push.
Got it. Thank you.
I think we can move on to the next slide. So parcel standards and CAMA. So we are kind of on the receiving end of this data set. The Intergovernmental Policy and Planning Division is kind of the spearhead of collecting this data through the COGS from the municipalities. So they've worked very hard to kind of create a standardized schema for the computer aided mass appraisal system, or the CAMA system, from every town. So they've worked with all the vendors to kind of create this standard. We have a very high rate of adoption. I think it's actually higher than 90% in practice on this year's collection. With what that means for us is that having a highly standardized schema for this stuff allows us to kind of really shortcut the process of aggregating all of this data and putting it into a quote unquote statewide parcel fabric. And allows us to kind of move from like, okay, how do we aggregate this into, okay, we have it aggregated. Now, how can we use this to its best effect to enable the geospatial and other communities, data processing communities throughout the state. We have received some of the data already, and IGPP is in the process of kind of validating and verifying that it is what it should be. And the GIS office will be receiving this data soon. And once the GIS analyst that I mentioned before that we are hiring for, that is going to be their primary job in the right off the bat to kind of aggregate and compile and kind of synthesize all of this data into a workable statewide parcel fabric. Yeah, Michelle, you had another question?
Yeah, so just because we've worked with this data before, so your standardization is going to work on standardizing the codes that are attached to each parcel?
It's going to, so the standardization in particular is not necessarily with the land use code. We are also working on that, but that is coming. What we are standardizing is the types of information that we are getting from the assessors, because every assessor does things ever so slightly differently from one another. So they might track certain fields. So what we said is, whether you collect this data or not, we want to receive your data in this format. And if there are blanks, there are blanks, but these are the stuff that cannot be blank, and this is the stuff that can be blank, but we need all of it.
Okay.
And that allows it, that makes just so much easier to kind of mesh everything together.
Got it. Okay. So the standardization of the codes will come later.
Yeah, we are working with IGPP and a few other folks to kind of start creating a standardized land use system so that we can be able to do regional land use analyses in kind of an apples and apples sort of way, as opposed to kind of like the ad hoc, lots of interpretation needed sort of way that is currently needs to be done, because all of the various assessors use a slightly different variation of their standard codes. Like, you know, they all have their ranges that they use for the different types, but within there's a lot of flexibility. So we are going to be working to kind of create almost a data dictionary to kind of translate from all of those individual categories into these quote unquote master categories that we are going to determine. And, you know, like I said, that work is forthcoming, but we'll get there eventually. And, you know, maybe in the next year or two, we'll have a standardized land use category system that will go along with this and really improve the quality of the data set.
That's great. So we had to, for Census 2020, the Census Bureau had asked for the information that's, you know, the land use codes, but it was very difficult, as you know, to put something comprehensive together. So that will be really helpful for the next decennial census if there's standardization with those codes. So thank you.
Yeah, not a problem.
I'm going to stop sharing since we are essentially at time. And I know we may lose some of the board members, but I want to see if there's other questions from the board, and then kick one thing off for sort of the next installment of this group's meetings, and just go over some of the timelines that we have for the remainder of the year. So just, I know we didn't get through, I think, Alfredo, everything that the GIS office is working on to cover, but that we can and should continue to meet as a group. Is there anything on that folks wanted to cover before I just quickly go through the timelines for the rest of the year? All right. Cool. So I will, we can actually, Valentina's posted the slides. We can send these out afterwards. I think as a reminder, for the group, one of the roles for the board is approving the state data plan, and we have to do that by the end of the calendar year. So I'll go through some of the, I think at a subsequent meeting, we can go through sort of what's in the state data plan this time around, the statutory purpose and scope for the plan. And then there are a couple of deadlines in statute for it. So I just want to share those, make sure the board's kind of up to date on those, and then we can think about the subsequent meetings. So the plan has to go in by the end of the calendar year this year. I submit it to this board by December 31st. I have to submit a first draft to the board by November 1st, and then within 30 days, the board has to hold a public hearing on the plan, which we had done, I think, pre-pandemic, and then during the pandemic via Zoom. So the next sort of deadline would be me sending the board a first draft of the updated state data plan by November 1st. And so, and you can think about this after the meeting. We want to determine, whether do you want to have another meeting before that timeline? Do you want to have 1 or 2 meetings? Is there, how does the board sort of want to work with that process? But there'll be a first draft of the plan by November 1st, 30 days to hold a public hearing, revisions to the plan, and then the plan comes in by December 31st. If there's quick reactions, but my sense would be from the discussions that it's maybe worth having a meeting in September or October to go through some of the things that folks have brought up in this discussion. You may have further thoughts after the meeting. We can flag those and then have a discussion about that to make sure what's in that first draft reflects the topics and the priorities that the board members have. So I see Thad, you've got a hand up.
Yes, Scott, I would propose that we meet sooner rather than later, at least once, if not twice, before that submission in September, and then looking at calendaring it being August, we probably want to get that scheduled as soon as possible.
Yes, scheduling, as always, is the greatest challenge. Okay, we can look for, unless folks object, I think we could look for something in September that gives us a little time to pull some things together. As kind of I said earlier, if there's if anyone who from the appointed members, if you've got suggestions or outreach to the appointing authorities, to my mind, having a full slate of the 8 seats filled will make this board, function a lot better. And this is the right time to do it, while we're developing and crafting the plan to really have it fulfill the intended functions. Anything else? I can't tell if someone's planning to unmute, so we'll reach out with a doodle poll or scheduling afterwards. Otherwise, thank you everybody for making the time for this. So Michelle, you were going to say something.
Yeah, I was just going to say, Scott, just for our duties under Section 4 and requesting, I don't know if the order of this, but thinking about the plan, and I mean, one of the focuses that I would like to see in the plan is just, what about mental health data? In terms of bringing agencies in, I'm just thinking about the legislative, focus and investments. And so it would be good to hear, I would, like to see that, developed out in the plan and in the data around mental health. Early childhood would also, so I don't know when we're supposed to request agency data officers to come speak, or, how we should go about doing that. But if that's September meeting or post-December meeting, seems like it maybe should be before. Or maybe we just send you an email, Scott, with ideas, because I'm sure other board members might have ideas and we've run out of time.
Yeah, maybe to Seth's point, we'll schedule a meeting sooner rather than later so that there is time for folks to, if you want to make a formal request to the board for somebody to come in, that there's time to do that before the November 1st timeline. But yeah, if folks have suggestions kind of after the meeting. Again, I think we gave you a lot to digest and did not fully get through all of those things. So, but I'm glad to get people back in the meeting, hopefully have this process and the board sort of back up and running. And we want to try and get a kind of update. But if you've got ideas afterwards, we'll set up a subsequent meeting sooner rather than later. And then there's hopefully then ample time to pull folks in or focus on a particular topic. Other than that, thank you everyone for making time for this, for remaining engaged in the process. And again, we will I get back to you soon for a subsequent meeting. If you've got thoughts after this, please don't hesitate to reach out. And I know a couple of you had questions that we'll try and follow up on sort of individually as well. So. Thank you. Thank you, Valentina, for get everything up and running for today as well. So, all right.
Absolutely. Thank
Great
you.
day. Bye.
Thank you all. Bye-bye.